Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This is the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be part 16, chapter 16, entitled Trapped by the Past. Izuku swings into consciousness with a pounding headache and a scream that dies in his throat. He registers two things at once. The first is that it's dark, but not because he's been blindfolded. There's no cloth over his eyes and he's blinking just fine. So he's either suddenly permanently blind, or there's literally no light whatsoever, and he is hoping to hell and back that it's the latter option. That the second is that it's cold, clinically cold, like the facility. He shivers, unable to repress it, and tries to calm his breathing. His head fucking hurts, a throbbing, searing sort of pain that he realizes distantly is at least partially because of the chorus of static in his head. Amahaki is furious and writhing all over Izuku's torso, squeezing along his spine, and twining his ribs together. "Stop it," he hisses out, unable to clear his head enough to think the command. Izuku? He stills, and inside of him Amahaki settles down to a movement that is not as painful but still present and full of weight. Shinso-kun? Fuck. Of course they took him too, bastards. They don't need Shinso. They probably don't even want him. He's just collateral, just a hostage. Izuku squirms, but his wrists and ankles are bound and he doesn't get far. He's sitting up, but just barely. He thinks he's tied to something, a pole, a pillar, the leg of a table, and it doesn't give no matter how hard he pulls on it. Shinso-kun. Fuck. Hitoshi, where are you? Are you hurt? It's hard to think past the pain in his head, but when he manages, all that smacks him is concern for his friend. He hears an intake of breath to his side, a meter, maybe, or maybe more. It's shaky. Hitoshi stops, breathes. My head hurts. I'm tied up, nothing's broken. Good, well, not good. Most of those things aren't good. I can't see. His voice hitches a bit on that, filled with a panic that Izuku knows from experience is not easy to stamp down. Me either, Izuku says, swiveling his head as if hoping to pick up on something in the darkness. There's just no light, Hitoshi, it's okay. There's a panic in Izuku's voice, too, and that's just no good because they can't both be panicking. He forces himself to breathe the way Aizawa taught him. In slowly, hold, out slowly, hold, repeat, until the static in his head becomes manageable and his heart stops feeling like it's about to jump straight out of his chest. Hitoshi? I'm still here. Izuku hates that tone in his friend's voice, hates the fear so much he thinks he tastes blood, or maybe he can taste blood. He might have bit his lip or his cheek or his tongue when his head was hit. Listen to me, he says, and he's not calm, but he's thinking, and that's a good start. Aizawa's always telling him to think. Hitoshi, I need you to listen to me, okay? Hitoshi hiccups what might be a laugh. You sound just like Aizawa-san. He does laugh then, a little hazy, but less panicky. I'm listening. Promise. Okay, good. He closes his eyes, tips his head back against wherever he's tied to. His shoulders are starting to hurt. Aizawa knows something's wrong by now. I don't think he'll be able to find us, but he's looking. We're late after all. Izuku isn't sure if that's a good thing, but it is a fact, and facts help clear his head. The people that took us, they're after me. Just me. Fuck, Hitoshi, I'm so sorry you got caught up in this. Izuku, what do you mean? Caught up in what? He shakes his head, even though Hitoshi can't see him. Tears threaten his eyes. If you don't hate me, when we get out of here, I'll explain everything to you, I swear. Maybe he should have explained when they first became friends. Maybe that was his biggest mistake in all of this, not giving Hitoshi the chance to decide for himself if he wanted to be friends with a monster. But we're going to get out of here. I need you to trust me. Let me lead. I'm going to get us out of... Metal grinds against metal, a screaming sound that ricochets in Izuku's ears and makes him wince, curling up into himself. A door opens in front of him, bright light streaming into the tiny room they're being held in, and Izuku has to blink rapidly for his eyes to fight away the pain and the dark spots that dance across his vision. Aw, isn't that just sweet? A voice croons echoing over the top of approaching footsteps, just one said. You've grown up so much, 15. Look at you being brave. Izuku knows who this is without having to see him. Doesn't know his name because he never learned their names, was never allowed to learn anything personal that could give him comfort, but knows what this man was to him, in his chest and his soul, that he's the cause of the hands that pry him open, and the ghost of fingers that won't leave his hair. Fuck you, he spits, squinting his eyes in an effort to see. It's a little better, but he wishes it wasn't because the doctor in front of him now, crouched down and smiling. His eyes are magenta. His hair is black. Now, 15. Is that any way to greet your father? It's been so long since we last saw each other, after all. His smile is saccharine, and fake, venom dripping just out of sight, and Izuku knows. And why everything was so awful in October. Why he flinched away from Aizawa and screamed into his pillow until his throat was raw and nearly bleeding, and couldn't sleep and couldn't wash away the hands that tried to break him. Motherfucker, Hitoshi swears, vehement and violent. The doctor just continues to smile and doesn't pay Hitoshi any mind. 15, he croons, reaching out slowly, almost gentle. Izuku flinches hard, turning his head away, fingers fist in his hair and slam his head back against the pole or the pillar or the table leg so hard he sees stars. You cut your hair. Such a shame. I much preferred it longer. Don't touch him! Hitoshi thrashes against his bonds. Izuku can hear it, but he remains ignored. Slowly, moving as little as possible, Izuku starts taking off his gloves. What the fuck do you want? He asks, leveling a glare at the doctor, who's backlit by bright white light and blurred around the edges because of it. A second hand darts out, lightning fast, and grabs Izuku hard by the chin, fingertips digging into his jaw, and thumb pressing so hard against his cheek that it digs into its teeth. Such foul language you've learned, 15. He sounds delighted, but he shakes his head and clicks his tongue as if he's disappointed. I'm sorry we couldn't bring you back home sooner. Just look what the world has done to you, my beautiful special boy. Izuku's stomach rolls, and he's not sure if it's disgust, anger, or the vicious way that Amahaki is turning up his insides. Probably all three. He pulls another finger free of his glove. You don't know anything, he says, no less venomous for how muffled he is. I've never been happier than I have been this past year. That makes me so sad, 15. The doctor keeps using that number, keeps calling him that. Izuku tries to shake his head, shake it away, but... Have you really forgotten how happy you were here? How much you used to look forward to my visits? No, lies. Flashes of memory hit him, repressed and shuddering and fractured as they come forward, hurt and pain, and then soothing hands, screaming and crying and blood, and then arms around him, holding him close, surgeries and punishments, and then hands carting gently through his hair, everything going wrong at the hands of the doctors, everything becoming too painful on the metal table in the bright white room, and then this man, cooing to him and carrying him back to his bedroom, soothing him, and twisting his words, twisting Izuku's thoughts until it felt like the pain was worth it, was what he deserved, was all he was good for. And if he just held on a little longer, if he was a good boy for father, he could be rewarded with the only positive physical touch he'd ever known. No. Izuku is shaking, trembling, he's crying, and the hand on his jaw loosens to wipe his tears away. You were always such a sweet boy, the doctor croons, leaning in close to his face, flooding his vision with magenta eyes and straight teeth. Leave him alone, Hitoshi shouts, but it's so far away, down a tunnel, just an echo. Shaking apart, Izuku looks up into those eyes and remembers. Why did you bring me back? He doesn't want to be here. He's scared. He just wants his dad's, his bed, his cats. He wants to go home and not have to think about how much the color magenta makes him want to throw up. Because I missed you, the doctor says, petting his face in a way that's almost caring, almost concerned, but the sick possessiveness overweighs it all. And because I want to help you. You look scared. I don't want you to hurt yourself anymore. Izuku's right glove comes off. He chokes on a sob and keeps looking into those eyes, because if he looks away now, he's going to shatter, and he needs to do this first. He needs to keep Hitoshi safe, even if that means Hitoshi will hate him, will be afraid of him, will stop being his friend. It'll be worth it, because Hitoshi will be alive. Amahaki thrashes under his skin, but Izuku keeps a chokehold on his power. He can't lose control now. Amahaki's power needs direction, and his hands are at his back. Both gloves need to be off if he wants to be able to do anything, if he wants to be able to save his friend. Hitoshi, he says, still looking at the doctor, still keeping his attention with free-flowing tears and a quivering lip. Don't look, okay? I don't want you to watch. Izuku, no, stop. The hand in his hair is still tight, and his headache pounds. The doctor leans in and gathers Izuku into his arms, despite the way he's still tied to whatever the fuck is behind him, taking those words as Izuku's permission, as a sign of him giving in and giving up. You're so good, 15. You remember, don't you? I can be reasonable, I can be gentle. There's a clear threat in those words, a promise of pain if Izuku disagrees with him, a promise of what he could do to Hitoshi, who has no value here. His left glove is almost off. You made a mistake, he breathes, wincing as the hand tightens even more in his hair, as those magenta eyes flash with their first showing of anger. And what mistake is that, my dear 15? Izuku leans forward into his space and bares his teeth. You dragged my friend into this. He pulls off his left glove, and Amahaki explodes out of him. The static in his head screams, white-hot and cacophonous, and Izuku shatters like glass. His bones break, reform, break again, grow and rearrange into a sick approximation of a skeleton, too large and too malformed to be human. A dark, shadowy, smoky, huge, endless, powerful body rips away from Izuku's skin. He shudders and screams, drowning in pain and hunger, freedom, bloodlust, until he's not sure where he ends and where Amahaki begins. Fuck the restraints. Fuck the man in front of him. Fuck the ground around him. Izuku feels himself ripped to pieces in a blinding flash of pain that lasts a second in 1,000 years. He screams and then it's static. Black blood pooling in his mouth and down his throat, too many arms and a too long torso weaving in and out of reality. Everything buckles around him. Them. They're strong. It's strong. He's strong and wrathful and... Don't hurt Hitoshi. Izuku's consciousness is all he has left, a sense of self and a floating numbness, a sea of static. Don't hurt him. Don't hurt him, don't hurt him, save him. Save him, save him, save him. His voice is joined by hundreds of thousands of others, racking against the endless expanse of Amahaki's being, begging and pleading for a show of mercy, in the face of anger, strength, power, freedom. A long, infinite, destructive clawed arm reaches out and squeezes the life out of the man on the ground like it's nothing. Magenta eyes vaporizing in a spray of red that soaks Izuku to the flesh that he doesn't have, to the bone that isn't his, memories, fears, horrors, screaming. Amahaki shudders, power flaring, flashing dark as the edges of the universe, sucking out the heat and the light of the stars and galaxies until it's all just cold and lonely and so empty. Something shatters, something groans, and Izuku fights the next wave of static, keeps his head above the water so that he doesn't drown in the screams around him. He thinks about Hitoshi, bound and afraid. His dads are somewhere too, looking for him, wanting him to come home. Thank you, Izuku thinks, and he doesn't flinch when the other voices echo it back, some in languages he's familiar with, some not, but he understands them all the same. I need you to go back now. I need to take care of Hitoshi. They're dead. Izuku already knows that. Somewhere in his consciousness he's killed more people now. When he could have waited for help, he's let all of his power out on purpose when maybe just a little would have been enough. It's going to hurt when he goes back in more ways than one. Thank you, he repeats, putting as much genuine affection as he can into those 2 words. He's not afraid of Amahaki. He's only ever been afraid of losing control. Faster than Amahaki took over, he retreats, and Izuku finds himself painlessly back in his body and, falling to his knees, to the floor below him, fist clenching tight on instinct. He winces, licks his lips, and spits black blood onto the cracked and red-stained cement in front of him. Dizziness bathes his senses, and he sways when he brings his head up, tracking his eyes around him at the unfamiliar landscape. But he hasn't moved, he realizes. It's just that the building has collapsed around him. A little over a meter to his left, Hitoshi sits. The restraints are off of him, Izuku notes distantly, registering the information, then dismissing it just as fast. He looks over his friend for injuries, for signs of Izuku's lost control. He doesn't see any. I'm sorry, he says, voice wet and thick. Hitoshi gets to his feet. This is it. He's going to run. He's going to leave. He's never going to come back. But at least he's alive. He's alive and he'll be safe away from Izuku. And then Hitoshi tilts Izuku's world on its axis by sprinting toward him, dropping to his knees, and wrapping him in a hug so tight that Izuku loses all the air in his lungs. Jesus, fuck, don't do that to me. Hitoshi hisses, wobbly and concerned and alive. He pulls back just enough to look Izuku in the eyes. Are you okay? Shit, fuck, Izuku, please tell me you're okay. A sob chokes out of Izuku, too fast to stop, and he leans forward into Hitoshi, dropping his head onto his shoulder. Hitoshi catches him, holds him, tucks Izuku against his chest like he's a child that needs to be kept safe. Izuku cries, loud and wet and verging on a panic attack. He's trying desperately to compartmentalize everything, but memories from before, from 15's life, keep flooding into him, things he thought he'd long ago forgotten. It's too much, and he selfishly lets Hitoshi hold him through it. I thought you'd be afraid of me, he manages to say a while later, trying to swallow his tears and getting progressively better at it. His hands are still clenched tight, not trusting his ability to keep Amahaki in check without covering his palms. The transformation drained him. He's running on fumes, and if anything else slips out of him, he's going to fall unconscious, and he doesn't want to leave Hitoshi alone. I'm not afraid of you, Hitoshi says, gripping Izuku tighter. He has one arm banded around Izuku's neck and a hand on his head to hold him close. Izuku clings back as tightly as he can, wanting to grip with his fingers but not trusting himself enough to relax his fists. Izuku, I'm not afraid of you. Never. More than anything else, those words settle over Izuku like a bomb, easing out his anxiety and stopping his tears before they get any worse. He sniffles a few times and then just breathes. Everything smells like dust and blood, which isn't great, but it's fine, because they're both alive. I should tell you, Izuku says, face still buried in Hitoshi's shoulder. Before the police show up. Before my dads tell me not to. Hitoshi leans back, even though Izuku still protests it, hands on Izuku's shoulders to support him, when he has a hard time keeping himself upright. A distant part of Izuku wonders why he's okay with the physical contact after everything, but the why doesn't really matter to him right now. He is okay with it. He doesn't want it to stop, doesn't want Hitoshi to leave him. Izuku, Hitoshi murmurs, and oh, he's been crying too, voice thick with emotion and faint tear tracks slipping down his cheeks. You don't have to tell me. If it's a secret, if you don't want to, it's okay. Izuku shakes his head. The necklace he had bought, the twin of his gift to Hitoshi, slips against his skin of his neck, and it's comforting enough for him to continue with a voice that's at least mostly steady. I was never homeschooled. He starts because he has to start somewhere. He has to tell this story because Hitoshi almost died for the secret. Not until last year, at least. Before that, I lived in a research lab. They just called it the facility, though. He tells Hitoshi everything, as much as he can remember without getting too detailed. Kumi-san is going to get an earful during their next session, but Hitoshi doesn't need the nitty-gritty. Izuku can't get it all out at once, has to stutter and stop, sometimes skipping huge quantities of time just so that he can stay centered, keep going on when the sound of sirens in the distance tells Izuku he's on a time limit. He talks, as much as he can, and Hitoshi watches him through it all, keeps his hands on Izuku's shoulders, grounding him in the moment. By the time Izuku finishes the story, the sirens are loud outside, and his throat has gone dry. He's shaking again, exhaustion and stress biting him hard, but he stays awake. If he loses consciousness, then Hitoshi will be alone. I almost got you killed, Izuku says, even though he doesn't want to speak because his voice sounds like sandpaper and his throat feels like it would rather be bleeding than be so dry. He looks back and forth between Hitoshi's eyes, searching for any indication that he's putting up a front, that he's going to run away the moment that he can pass Izuku off to an adult. But Izuku doesn't see any of that. Hitoshi shakes his head firmly, a frown taking over his face with a pinch of his brows and a tug at his mouth, but his touch is so gentle when he wipes at the tears staining Izuku's cheeks. No, they almost killed me. You saved me. You got us both out. He smiles, then, soft and small and not completely replacing the tension on his face. I was scared, he admits, thumb brushing at Izuku's cheekbones and not letting him look away. But only because he was going to hurt you, because I thought he was going to take you away, because when that thing ripped out of you, I thought it killed you. Izuku sags forward, relieved that Hitoshi isn't leaving, distressed that he still managed to upset his friend with what he did, and Hitoshi pulls him against his chest, once more without hesitation. The sirens reach a fever pitch, loud enough that Izuku winces and tucks himself, once more, firmly against Hitoshi's shoulder. But they quickly die off after that. Izuku can see lights, red and blue and red, and bright, over Hitoshi's shoulder, flashing through the muted darkness of an early evening, bouncing off of rubble and sparking electric lines that hadn't been completely destroyed by a mahaki. Voices call out, checking for survivors, and Hitoshi responds when Izuku can't. Several sets of footsteps echo against the 2.5 remaining walls around them, structural integrity kept just enough in check to not hurt Hitoshi when Amahaki was raising everything else to the ground. Izuku doesn't look up until he hears a familiar voice, one that has sat at the table with him in Hizashi's or Aizawa's apartment more than once. "Tsukuchi-san?" he asks, voice cracking when he tries to make it loud. 3 forms swim in Izuku's vision, black and barely visible against the spinning lights. 2 of them come to a hard stop, but a third rushes forward, jumping over rough pieces of concrete in a practice way. "Izuku?" The detective comes into focus a couple meters away, and he stops the moment Izuku flinches at the fast approach, the moment Hitoshi stiffens and shifts his body to shield Izuku. "Fuck, kid." Tsukuchi-san pushes a hand through his hair. "Do you know that you have single-handedly caused me more paperwork in the last year than any other person I've dealt with aside from Aizawa?" He sounds defeated, and it would be funny if Izuku didn't hurt so bad. Can you call my dad's? He asks instead of providing an answer for a question that's clearly not meant to have one. Tsukuji-san stares at him for a moment, just the span of a single breath taking him in before his shoulders slump. Yeah, I'll call them, Izuku, but you two need to get outside in the meantime before this place collapses. He turns to look over his shoulder. Matsushita, come over here and help these kids get outside. Izuku immediately stiffens at the approach of two strangers. Doesn't matter that he knows they're police officers or that Tsukuji knows them. People he can't even see, ringed by light just like... Hitoshi holds him closer, fingertips sliding into the longer hair at the top of Izuku's head. Don't, he says, forceful and biting. It takes Izuku a moment to realize that Hitoshi isn't talking to him, but it sinks in when the approaching figures slow to a stop. Kid. Tsukuji-san starts, exasperated, but he doesn't get further than that before Hitoshi interrupts him. I've got him. It's practically a growl, especially from someone as mild-toned as Hitoshi usually is. He's fucking traumatized. Just back off and get his dad's here. Hitoshi turns to Izuku then, and his voice immediately gentles. Izuku? Hey, Izuku, listen to me. We need to go outside, okay? Do you think you could stand? Izuku swallows, throat thick with tears that he just doesn't have the energy to shed right now. Not on my own, he says. He watches Tsukuji-san step back a few paces and bring his phone from his pocket while the other two officers retreat to give them space. I'm so tired. Loosening his hold around Izuku's shoulders and waist, Hitoshi takes Izuku's arm and drapes it over his neck. I know. I'm going to help you, okay? Okay. He goes easily, melting against Hitoshi's side, and slowly stumbling to his feet as he's dragged up off the ground. He takes as much of his own weight off as he can, which is, thankfully, the majority of it. Because he knows that he's not exactly light, and Hitoshi had already done so much for him today. They stumble out of the rubble together past a couple of buried, crushed bodies, and several aerial sprays of blood. Izuku doesn't count them. He doesn't. 10. With a whimper, Izuku sinks to his knees the moment they're clear, and Hitoshi goes down with him. Paramedics try to swarm them, but Hitoshi glares them all away. One of them braves his ire and returns, glaring at Hitoshi just as ferociously as he is at her, and she tosses a blanket, 2 juice boxes at him, before stepping back. Wrap yourselves in the blanket, she instructs, folding her arms. She reminds Izuku a bit of if Coco was a human. He thinks she'd be stern in her care like that. And drink all the damn juice, got it? Fine. Hitoshi doesn't move for a moment, and when he does, it's to blow out a tense breath. Can I have a roll of bandages? I need to wrap his hands. The paramedic straightens. You should let... He's not hurt, Hitoshi interrupts. Just get me some bandages, please. He adds on, though he doesn't sound at all like he means it, forcing the word through clenched teeth. Izuku pokes Hitoshi's side with his knuckles. It's okay, he says, exhausted and weary. It's not okay, very much not so okay, but they're both alive, and mostly unhurt, so that's a win, he's pretty sure. Hitoshi. It doesn't feel weird to call his friend by his first name. It feels right. Like this is how it was always meant to be. Too bad it took something awful and traumatic like this for the name to come so easily to Izuku's lips, for Hitoshi to allow it. Carefully, Hitoshi drapes the blanket over Izuku's shoulders. Izuku uses the excuse to nestle in closer, not having realized he's shaking until now. He doesn't feel cold, but it's shock, he supposes. Aizawa has explained that to him before. The paramedic returns a moment later, walking up to them this time because Izuku doesn't flinch away. She drapes a second blanket over Hitoshi's shoulders, despite the grumbled, I'm fine, and then she passes him 2 thin rolls of white bandages before moving away. Let me see your hands, Hitoshi murmurs, resting his forehead on Izuku's shoulder so that they don't have to pull away from each other. Everything's warm in this little bubble that Hitoshi had built them. Izuku lifts his left hand, palm side up, but doesn't unclench his fist yet. Does it have to be completely covered? Hitoshi asks as he starts to unroll the bandages a little, circling the loose end around Izuku's wrist. No, Izuku shakes his head slowly, hoping it doesn't hurt against Hitoshi's shoulder. Just mostly. Okay, I'll go fast then. One hand at a time, Hitoshi pulls the bandages from the rolls and winds them around Izuku's palms, covering the marks as quickly as he can before going back over to make sure the wraps are secure. His fingertips are cold. If Izuku had more energy, if he wasn't ready to pass out at any moment, he probably would berate Hitoshi for not taking care of himself, but as it is, as soon as his hands are wrapped and he has usage of his fingers back, Izuku grabs Hitoshi's hand and holds them gently in his own. Oh, Hitoshi inhales, sighs, and then sags against Izuku. Izuku holds him up. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 16 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 17 will be next. As always, though, thank you all so much for listening.